set of 9 videotapes provides an opportunity to share in a unique experience where Stafford Beer introduces an audience to the world of managerial cybernetics. The event took place over 5 days in July 1994 at the Falcondale Hotel near Lampeter in Mid Wales. It was organised by the Liverpool Business School at John Moores University, where Stafford is Honorary Professor in Organisational Transformation and a Senior Fellow. The aim was to provide a video learning resource by recording discussions between Stafford and an audience that had little or no previous knowledge of the subject. Over the course of the event, Stafford explains the development of the subject from the initial scientific discovery of cybernetics. Through his own development of managerial cybernetics, he introduces the tools and models that he has created to offer an alternative approach to conventional management practice. The resulting material embraces the key principles and models that have previously been introduced in his 13 books and referred to in many of his published papers. This is the first learning resource where all these have been brought together in one integrated way. Managerial cybernetics continues to be the only available scientific and coherent account of effective managerial practice. Stafford provides numerous anecdotes, applications and insights from the perspective of practitioner, manager and scientist. The 6th session extends the basic model of management, operations and environment, called System 1, to the general case where you have multiple System 1s, each with their own distinctive focus. Attention switches to the issue of how these need to be connected so that the whole enterprise fulfills its purpose. In his quest for a general theory of viability, Stafford argues the need to add 6 vertical communication lines to the basic model. In practice, these lines are loops of communication. Horizontal loops generate variety and vertical loops absorb variety. These loops adjust the total variety equation between the horizontal and vertical variety in order for the total system to reflect the purpose of the whole. This communication diversity contrasts sharply with the popular perception that all management communication should be sent down one command channel. Many typical situations are used to illustrate the need for and nature of each type of communication channel. Examples are taken from health, steelmaking, Amnesty, IBM, Royal Bank of Canada, the Fish and Chip Shop, liberation theology, and a group that is set up for loving one another.
Well now, let's start. We have got, as you see, we thought that we'd make the mirror opaque because you can't see very clearly. And what we had was this. Right? Now we put an amplifier on there and there, and an and an attenuator there, and there. I should have left gaps to put that in, but I didn't. Now, that is an exemplar of System 1. In other words, going back to our defense model, it's the army inside defense, right? Now, there are going to be several of them, aren't there? Otherwise, what are we playing at, you know? So, what I want you to consider now, please, thank you, is some more of these. I'll just put in 4 of them. Oh dear, I made a bit of a mess of that. That's life. So this is a sketch now rather than a formal diagram. But you've got the idea. Now, what I wish you to consider next is what's upsetting you? Karen?
I didn't see it while you were drawing.
Oh, I see. Well, there it is. I'll go over here, but yeah. So all of those are that. Take it from me. So now, what I want you to consider now, we've considered how that works across there for each element of System 1. That is the whole System 1. It's got all the elements in it. In this case, there are 4. There may be more, maybe less. And what we have to consider now is what is the connection between those guys? Now, there's likely to be a connection, isn't there? Because they're all part of the same enterprise, same organization, however we're defining this. And what is that connection? Now, one of them is already up there. Can you see what it is? The environments. Now, I believe that it's very, very difficult not to share the environments if you're in the same organization. Now, please accept the obvious convention here is, I've only got 2 dimensions, I haven't got 3. To connect this to that, you don't have to go through the other 2. You with me? So this connection, and this connection, and this connection includes this connection to that, which I'm not showing. Okay? So there is a very strong environmental interaction. Now, let's take examples of that. You have an enterprise that's looking at the whole of Canada, shall we say, leaps to mind. And you have something, let's suppose you're the federal government of Canada, you have something going on in all the 10 provinces of Canada. Now, when you draw those, this is effectively a map, isn't it? And you're going to have a clear line between 2 provinces. But, you see, from a cybernetic standpoint, that isn't very realistic. It's okay from a geographic and a legalistic standpoint, but the people around that boundary are not going to recognize that they're different. I mean, you don't straddle the line and say, ho, ho, half of me is in Saskatchewan and half of me is in Manitoba, you know, it doesn't make sense. There are other reasons why that's going to be connected, because, for instance, we might all say, well, we are all Canadians. Now, let's get to commercial applications. You can have sales areas which demarcate, but you see, if your company gets the name for doing something naughty or something especially good or whatever, it's going to rumble over. So what I'm saying to you is that if you look at those interconnections in the vertical, we've so far looked at the horizontal, what you're going to find out is that variety is being absorbed. Because you cannot have the reputation of being Rolls-Royce in this bit of the world and of being a rubbishy Dagenham dustbin in another part of the world, because it wouldn't be most unlikely. Either you're a quality car or you're not a quality car, and the reputation is going to slop over. If you're McDonald's, there are things about McDonald's which are uniform, and that's the whole idea. So this is absorbing variety in the vertical domain. So I think that's quite interesting. I'm asking the question, how does this total organization cohere, given that we've separated the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force? We've separated primary, secondary, tertiary education in the education system. We've separated general practice and hospitals and clinics and whatever in the health system, but they are all part of it. And in what sense are they part of it is the next thing to investigate. Now, I've started by saying, well, their environments absorb each other to a very considerable extent. I now put to you the question, what, if anything, is the interaction between the circles?
Common goals. Common practices.
Is there are any of them linked?
Well, that's the question I'm asking you. Sorry?
How the environment have an overlap?
Well,
Are any of the circles?
well, that's the question I'm asking. And what I think you can immediately see, and the reason you're having a problem here, is it depends. It depends. Now, this is what I ludicrously call the squiggly line connection. It's got stuck, so everybody calls it the squiggly line, because I put that in there, you see, and it's a squiggly line. And we really do have to ask what the coherence might be in any given situation. Well, now look, I mentioned steel to you, and that's an example you can readily follow. If the top one in the circle is taking in iron ore, shoving it in a blast furnace and producing molten iron, and then it travels down the squiggly line and it gets into a steel furnace, and then it's reduced and the carbon's got out and the phosphorus and the sulfur have got out, and you've now got steel. And then that goes into ingots in the next one, and then the ingots are squashed and become all sorts of products. Lower down the line, billets, slabs, strip, you name it. Now, that means the squiggly line connection is very, very strong, isn't it? Because you know, it's causal, forgive the terrible word, you see, it's causal, because nothing happens until it's fed down. Now, if you were Unilever, on the other hand, Unilever is effectively a holding company, and it makes all sorts of things. And it used to have McFisheries. I think that's long since gone. You don't remember it, but that's fish shops. You know, nothing to do with margarine, for instance, or be a bit fishy if it were. So these enterprises are quite separate, and they are linked by the fact that they're competing for capital, for instance, from the parent company. And that's pretty minimal. And they're competing, to use a word popular in Unilever, they're competing for crown princes. These are the up-and-coming flyers who are being moved around and given ever increasingly important jobs and are going to end up on the board, you know. But that's the minimal squiggly line. The maximum is the other one. So, now we got to the squares. Have a look at that. These are the management units. What connects them, if anything? Indeed. What else? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, that's going to be up the top, you see. I'm creeping up on what I call the meta system, which is managing all this. At the moment, we're sticking at system 1. I better warn you, there are 5 systems. So we've got a long way to go. System 1 is defined, please remember, as what it is we're supposed to be doing. And that is not going to match your organization chart, because you're going to have huge departments in the organizational chart which are supportive and are absolutely nothing to do with why you're there. So the janitor's department in the school that's supposed to be keeping the school going is an accident. It's nothing to do with the purpose of the school. What are the system 1 of the school, folks?
Education. Teachers. Classroom.
Yeah, but that's the purpose of the whole damn thing, Paddy. What is the system 1? Somebody said it. Yes, well, don't forget, you only move one set at a time, one recursion. So if you're thinking of a school, you're not going to hit the pupils.
Classes.
Pardon? Classes, obviously. So these are going to be classes. And the next recursion, you take a class, and you're now looking at the teacher and the students. But at this level, I want you to get used to this recursive way of looking at things. You're looking at the... let's stick with the school for a minute. These are classes. The management of each class is the form teacher, I suppose. What is the coherence between the square boxes? Common aim, yes. Somebody said something rather like that already. Well, I want to distinguish 2 different things. And now, we know there's going to be something up top here. So this blue line and this red line are going to be the 2 things I want to talk about. Now, the red line, let's pick that because of the colour, is a sort of alarming colour. The idea about this red line is that there is some kind of statutory obligation. You're running a company, you must obey the Companies Act. And if you don't, you see, right through the organisation, all the pieces of the organisation, if somebody is trading without enough money, if they're separate companies, let's say in a consortium of companies, and one of them runs out of money, it's disobeying the red line. So you've got legal restrictions, and you may have equally strong, let's call them ethical constraints imposed by the company being what it is. And it says, we are not going to play that game. We don't approve of it. For instance, when I was development director of IPC, I took over a company and discovered, a rather large company, and I discovered that hidden in it was a group that sold encyclopedias by banging on people's doors and forcing housewives to sign things that they didn't want. So we invoked this ethical line, you see, which had nothing to do with the law. It was a perfectly legitimate company, but we didn't like it. So we got rid of it. We sold it. So that is to impose legal and ethical requirements, and that is very strong stuff. So how much variety do you want to use up like that? You see, if you say too much, you can't get anything done well expressed. So we're running into a very interesting phenomenon here, which has to do, to be very abstract about it, about, I'm not making signs here, just warding off the devil or anything. We have the vertical and the horizontal all over the place, vying with each other, because this one is generating a lot of variety doing its thing, and this one is saying, just a minute, don't do that, we don't like it, or that's illegal. Yeah. So that's the red line. Now, I really want you to think about this, because it is, in my book, it is exactly what distinguishes one kind of organization from another kind. Let us suppose that the group of us in this room decided to rob a bank. We've already split up into groups. I forget who you are. You go and make a bomb. You could do that. You look after the transportation. We have to have the cars arriving at the right time, and we have to get the hell out of there at the right time, and it's got to be meticulous planning, otherwise we're all in jail together. What are you going to do? What's your group going to do?
What, spend the money?
Launder the money? Plan it?
Yeah, well, launder the money is a good one. I mean, when you've got the money, what the devil are you going to do with a bunch of bullion, you know? So all that's got to be attended to, and I'm sure you can find a job here.
Planning the money?
Yeah, well, yes, there's got to be a lot of investigation, tunnels dug and all sorts of things. So there we are. Now, you four groups are now these four groups. And we've all agreed that this is our enterprise. Now, how much variety do you expect to have left in your square at the end of that? You've got to run your group. You know, you three are a group, and you're in charge, Karen. How much variety have you got, given the rest of the thing? Oh, yes. I mean, you've sold it. You've all sold it. Because it's no use having a marvellous operation if the darn cars don't come. You let the show down, we're all in jail. And it's no use, etc. The whole thing is cemented together, and by the very nature of the beast, there's very low variety for each of these things. Now, take another example. Here we are, we're a very nice set of people. We decide to institute a society for loving one another. You're concerned about kids. You're concerned about geriatrics. God knows what you're concerned about. I dread to think, you see. So every subgroup is going to express its notion of what it is to love other people. And now, what is restricting your variety? Yes, there is. Just one thing, I think. If any of you are caught hating somebody, you're out. And that's the limit. Now, what an extraordinary difference. Now, people often say to me, Stafford, for God's sake, every organization is different. How can you possibly have a general theory, which I claim to have? Well, now we're getting near it, aren't we? Because you can still depict it like this. Now, what exactly is the difference in those two examples?
Red line.
What's the size of the challenge, isn't it?
Yes. Let's have a more general... What is the governing principle?
The constraints that you have to work within.
Yes, that's true. But why? Lift the argument.
Common purpose.
That's exactly the word I want. Thank you very much, Lee. It's the purpose that determines the degree of restriction. Now, that is very interesting because, of course, purpose of all these subjective things that we talk about in the system is about the most subjective of all. Because the purposes of the individuals who make up IBM are probably as different from chalk and cheese. I mean, some are in there to get a free ride, some are in there to further their careers, etc., etc. And what the company's purpose is another matter altogether. And, of course, if you detect in a company that somebody is doing something that is personal to them and doesn't contribute to what's supposed to be the corporate purpose, they're going to be swung out, aren't they? So this idea of purpose is absolutely governing this interchange of variety. And I find that totally fascinating and a big secret, actually, in trying to analyze what the devil's going on in any given situation. You know, if you're a fire engine and you've got to get there, everything else goes by the board. All your variety is going to be consumed. If you're amnesty, different thing. We did mention amnesty before. Millions of ways of trying to deal with the problems that amnesty faces, and everybody's solution is going to be different and all acceptable, providing they don't involve being nasty. You see, after all, that's the purpose. So purpose is crucial.
Purpose.
No. I'm subsuming everything in this. The purpose is going to be reflected in all the vertical lines we're putting up here. So far, we've got the environment. Now, the purpose is going to be reflected there. Because if you're going to be Amnesty International, then you want all the environments to reflect this well-intentioned thing, and especially, for instance, they have got to have the reputation for being honest. I mean, the way to attack a thing like amnesty is to say, oh, you bunch of, you cook the evidence. And once that's set in as a reputation, you've had it all over the world, not just where it happens. The squiggly line connection also reflects the purpose because, well, doesn't it? You know, if you've got this strong connection like the steelworks, if you've got the weak connection like the conglomerate, clearly it's reflected. Then we come to the red line. Now, the red line is the one that has a fiat on it, is the legal and ethical stop point, and that clearly is going to reflect the purpose, obviously. Now, I haven't said what the blue line is, and I'm sorry, Catherine, that's why I was... No, I haven't said it. Let me say, first of all, that every line on my diagrams is actually a loop. It takes too long to put them all in, and then you can't see. Now, the blue line, because you see the red line comes down and says, don't do this, and then you have to go back and say, no, I'm not doing it, and you have to prove that. So that's actually a loop. So it is in the steelworks. If you're sending this iron down the chain, you have to have a thing coming back and saying, yes, we got it, and it's all working. Now, the blue line is what I call the resource bargain. Yes, and I believe that is the major function of management in the vertical. See, what you're saying to the individual bit of System 1 is, what do you need? You're part of our show. What do you actually need? And you say, well, I've got this budget, I'm planning to do this, this, and this. So what you're actually saying is, will you fund me to this extent? And the resource bargain says, yes, I will fund you, I'm higher up than you are, I will fund you, but you have to come back on the return loop and constantly show me that you're spending the money correctly and it's all working and we're getting the payoff and so on. So that's why I call it the resource bargain. And you notice, this is very different from the concept of management which says, you're part of our show, this is what you're going to do, fella. Get on with it. Oh, you're out. It is a very much more liberal and sophisticated thing which says, well, what can you take on? And if it's not good enough, I'm entitled to say to you, is that the best you can do, for goodness sake, And you sort of hype it up, but there is a homeostatic point here where the senior management agrees with the System 1 management that this is the deal. Now, under a self-vetoing homostat, you shouldn't be constantly having to penetrate this stuff and ask all these damn fool questions. You want to set that up so that you just know on a self-vetoing homeostatic basis that things are okay. Why should you go poking around down there? That's what's going to get you reputation as a fascist bastard, you see. And you would be if you kept doing that. Now, it's a very interesting phenomenon that I've observed all over the place in every kind of organization. I go in at the top, which I haven't drawn yet, because I won't go in anywhere else. So I'm talking to the president of the company or the president of the bank or whatever. And this guy says, please understand, Professor, we are very liberal around here. We've all been on the courses and we know that we shouldn't be bullying people. So we've got all these things in place. And very often the directors of a company will say to me, rather sadly, of course, not like the old days, you know, old chap, I'm not quite sure why I'm here. I'm here as an advisor, really, and nobody ever asks my advice. I think I might as well go home. So this is the denaturing of the old model of do this and he doeth it. Now, that's what they told me. I then go and visit these branches or these divisions or whatever they are. What do I find? I find everybody with copies of the Times looking for a new job. So I say to them, what's up? They say, oh, God, this place is dreadful. You can't get a new biro without triple application. It's a terrible place. You know, this is real. I mean, he's laughing because he seems to have lived all these incarnations that I keep talking about. Poor Glenn, you need a better job somewhere. What I'm trying to point out to you is that these are perceptions of precisely the same thing. There is only actually one company operating out there. And what do we mean by reality? We were asking yesterday. The point is that there is only one reality, whatever it means, and here are the people up top see it this way, and here are the people this way see it quite differently. So what's going on? Perception is obviously very different, but what it means is, of course, that people are using up each other's varieties in ways that nobody suspects. Now, I'll try and make that concrete for you. I was in a firm in the north of England here, which had this belief at the top that it was very liberal, and where all the branches were looking for jobs. So I tried to find out why that difference of perception could possibly exist. And I discovered the following. The financial director, who was the nicest bloke you could wish to meet in a month of Sundays, sweetie pie, trying to help, had issued a thing this thick, telling everybody what to do. You see, at least that's what they thought. He thought it was a handbook of advice and comfort and so on. They called it the Bible. They actually called it the Bible, and they said, God, you can't do that, it's probably in the Bible somewhere. And they really felt totally victimized by this document, which was supposed to the sweetie pie's image, self-image, to be a nice help. So what I did was I took the Bible and I tore it up, literally. I tore all the pages out, and I sorted it. And I sorted it out to the subsystems, and I'm telling this story too early in a sense, because there are 5 of them, and we've only got to the first one. But I sorted it out between the 5 subsystems, because what I'm trying to tell you, never mind the others, is that the only one that matters is the red line. Now, the Bible came down to about 5 pages. I printed those on red paper. I said to the financial director, publish those as the rules. Publish the rest in 4 other different colors, saying that this is meant to do this is meant to do this by way of helping, and he did this. And the whole atmosphere totally changed. It was a whale of a success, that, just by talking in terms of perception. Because people don't like having their variety stolen. This is the point. And if you take away this man's variety, look at him. What did we analyze earlier? He's got too little variety to deal with the process, which has too little variety to deal with the environment. And what little he's got left are going to take away by saying, don't do that, change your shirt, you know. Well, it's totally frustrating. So you mustn't do that. What you've got to do is things to encourage the guy to use his variety and help him amplify it. Otherwise, you might as well put a switch in there. You know, just a switch, a little computer which says, in these circumstances, do that. And if you're going to use a human being with leadership quality, with the ability to react and adapt and so on, you better let him rip. If you don't, you're nuts. And that's part of the trouble with things like the church and the army, which have come up before in our discussions, because nobody dares. And when they dare, things go badly wrong. Look at liberation theology and what happened to that. Some of you must...
I think that was correct.
No? Oh. Has nobody heard of liberation? Yes, of course you have. No? No? Pardon? Permission to hit this fellow, okay. Well, it came out of Latin America because the whole of Latin America is strongly Catholic, or alleged to be, but nobody actually gets married, and you know it's all very relaxed down there. In fact, the way they handle marriage in the family is absolutely wonderful. I think they don't really. I don't think many people are actually legally married, and they have children, and they pass the children around, and the little community handles the whole situation, messes with this variety perfectly happily. And the role of the priest is not to go around saying, how dare you, you're living in sin, as would happen over here. He goes around saying, bless you, you know, you're doing a good job. Very different. So the liberation theologians, care to put a name forward?
Romero.
Yes, well, Romero, yeah, well, he was shot for his pain. So, Paulo Freire, I suppose, is the most famous of them. Anyway, this bunch of people started putting together a formal theology to account for all this, and the Vatican sat on it, you see, because... And this was a very bad tragedy, I think, because that was a real growth point in the church that looked very promising. And of course the Latin Americans carry on anyway, they don't care. But the spin-off in the more anal retentive part of society in Europe has been not been good at all. Yeah. So, we now have an environment, that's one line. A squiggly line, that's two, and we've now got 3, 4, all of which are cohesive to the organization, given that these things we perceive to be separate for some reason in our analysis. Now, what is the 5th line? It's not there. Now, you know, many funny puzzles say, you now have enough information to solve this problem. You know, those jokes, those puzzles. You have enough information to tell me what the extra line is. It's not on the diagram. How can I get this out of you?
What's the connection between the red line and the environment?
No, we're just talking about this crossover. There is a missing vertical line, not a connection. Look, we have been talking for some minutes about the generation of variety this away and the containment of variety this away. Now, how do we know they're going to balance? Because the theory, the law of requisite variety, our whole notion of homeostasis says they must, doesn't it? I mean, that is the masterstroke, that all that is going to be in balance. Well, how do we know it is?
The channels connected by which the channels that the information is passed through, are they connected?
Which channels?
Channels between
We've got a lot
the
on there.
environment and the product and the management.
So that's the horizontal, what I'm calling the horizontal, you see. Now I'm saying there's something missing vertically that will match the vertical versus the horizontal in total. Yes, now we're getting near it. I'm going to add a line to this. I wonder if I can find... Yes, there's green there. Well, yes, but you see, you can study the things we've already talked about, but what I'm pointing to is an overriding susceptibility that the vertical may not match the horizontal. There's nothing there that says it will. I mean, with any luck it will, because you're doing all the right things. But supposing there's something left over. Well, excuse me, this line, which I'm putting in green, is there to accommodate any excess. This is to say that if the horizontal variety is greater than the vertical variety, you're going to get out of balance. And I want to put that line in to pick it up and correct it. Now, I'm really stretching you here because I'm asking you to make it a hugely abstract judgment. But the interesting thing is that you go out into the so-called real world and you find this green line all over the place. And I want you to try and see what it is. Let's take the simple example. Simplest example is an ordinary little business that does things out here, you know, it makes some things or whatever. And there are all its lines. And we want to know... I don't want to feed you too much. Will anybody... I mean, I will if I have to, but somebody say something.
What Petra was saying, that it is your feedback in the fact that it's telling you are things in balance, are things right.
Right, that's true. That's true. Now, that's true. So please work at that in your mind.
If you're talking about excess, perhaps it's the amount of stock you carry.
Mm-hmm.
You produce too much.
But that would only be... That would only deal with stocks. I'm trying to be very general here about this disbalance. There are things we do in a business which are exactly the green line, and I want you to try and realize what it is.
An assessor to if it's not actually involved, like a great deal, an outside agent, like a union.
No, this is part of the system. It's part of the system.
Is this something that will come into the system but will be held and used later?
Could be.
It can't be absorbed right now.
Could be.
Like an audit.
It's the second time you've got the exact word I was looking for. It's the audit. It's the thing that says, you see, if one of these guys is running amok, then there's going to be suppose one of these square fellows is making off with the funds, you know. He's a crook. How are you going to catch him? This rest of the system is not going to catch him, the one we've described, because it's working on the assumption that everybody's in this game together, not that somebody's going to go mad. That means that there's a whole bunch of variety going on in his strip of the horizontal system, and you've got to catch it. So the audit is supposed to catch it.
But the thing there was mentioned by somebody that it needs to be an independent, I think they called it assessor rather than audit. It needs to be an independent assessor.
Well, it might be. You see, I already said, yes, maybe, you see. Now, it can be an independent, but it can be internal. You can have internal audits. And of course, it's not just money.
It could be a green audit or a...
Absolutely. Absolutely that. It could be anything that's going to pick up loose variety, is the point.
What if the auditor came from management, from the square box, and it's a square box who creates selective variety, then they wouldn't say the selective variety anyway, so it's still...
They wouldn't say what, sorry?
They wouldn't say, if they were the ones that were corrupt
Yeah.
in the first place, they're not going to say that they were corrupt, they'd just carry on making it look like...
They'll do their best. But the point of the audit is to catch them.
But if they're doing the audit, or someone from...
Oh, no, look, the green line. If one of these people is running amok, the green line's coming down from upstairs. They're not in control of that.
Yeah, but what you're saying is the person from the green line doing the audit, they could be corrupt.
Oh, they could be, yes. You can buy anybody off in the limit. But what we're looking at is a structure that's supposed to work. So these kind of policing activities are supposed not to be corrupted. They may be, and we can examine all the consequences of that, and there's plenty of it going on, obviously. But the principle here is to use up any surplus variety. And this is, you see, although I'm very grateful to Lee for giving me exactly the word I wanted, don't stick too closely to this professional word audit, because what I'm really trying to say is that the green line will absorb spare variety. Let me give you an example which you wouldn't automatically think of as being an audit. Let's suppose that this company is working in engineering. So it has innumerable electric motors everywhere. And the companies do, you know. You can't move for electric motors if you start thinking about it, because practically everything has a motor in it. And they're all different, because the people on the horizontal lines have bought this kind of motor because they like it and because it suits them and because. And another line horizontally has bought a different lot of motors. And we end up with a huge number of motors. Now that's a very great deal of electric motor variety, you see, hyphenated. So somebody upstairs, and we haven't analysed what's happening upstairs, but we will. Somebody upstairs says, what gives with all these electric motors? Just look at the amount of capital we've got tied up in spares. So just take the obvious example. You know, that all these motors have to have spare motors, and they have to have extra windings lying about, and extra this, that, and the other. So somebody upstairs says, all this variety. Now, how do you intervene? You don't want to come down the red line and say, you can't work for us unless you have the right electric motor. Come off it. See? And you don't even want to make it part of the resource bargain and say, well, I will only give you the capital if you switch to GE motors. I also come off it. But what you could do, you could go to these managers and say, fellas, we have realized that we have enormous investment in all these damn motors. Is this sensible? And the manager says, gosh, that much? Probably not. So, upstairs says, we will come down, if you agree, we will come down the green line. Now, notice where I've put it. And we will go straight into your process, given that we have your prior permission as the manager, which is correct. We will conduct a survey of all the electric motors. And that's not going to infringe on your authority as the manager, because you have just agreed that's a good idea. They come up now with a report. Now, this is probably work-study department of the whole organization, going to come out with a report saying, this is our recommendation. We need a variety of electric motors, but not this much. And if we agreed this policy, it looks to us as if all the managements are going to be satisfied, and we will cut our investment in all this crap by 2/3. Now that isn't to steal the authority and the variety off the manager if he's agreed to it and if he likes the answer. Now we've really soaked up some spare variety, is what I'm saying. So that is a sort of audit, isn't it? But it doesn't have the overtones of the financial audit where you're looking for crooks, probably. Anything like that, Kate very wisely said a green audit. I mean, you can look in there and say, what are we generating that is environmentally unfriendly? You can do any of these things. And please see them as part of the balancing of the total homeostatic equilibrium of the whole show. And if we do that, we don't get the unease that is generated by things being out of balance and nobody's recognized.
There are now statutory audits on that respect as well now with new legislation, particularly the health and safety commission, the European councils. That red line is getting fatter and fatter by the month.
That is true, and it shouldn't and needn't, is my message there. The more you cram onto the red line, the less people feel free to strut their stuff. You're reducing their really needful variety to do their job properly, and they get more and more frustrated. And this is what we call bureaucracy gone amok, and that's what's been happening in Brussels. I absolutely agree with you. And there's so much better ways of handling it. Now, the kind of thing that a clever work-study department or a production engineering department can do on that line, clever accountants can behave in that sense financially, and the green thing and everything else. Another that occurs to me, and of course in a free conversation like this, nothing I say is to be regarded as exhaustive, you know. I'm just trying to bring points out. One of them that is very important is the audit, to use that word with the quotes on it, of managerial management succession, can I call it? We have to look to see if anybody's coming up and how we're training them. And that's a sort of audit. You're not looking for crooks and so on, but you're looking for where the variety is going to work thin, is the other thing. And it's common to find that a bunch of cronies have been running a show, and they're all suddenly becoming 65 together, and there isn't anybody in sight.
When a lot of companies run an appraisal system for their employees.
They do, and that's it. That's the green line. Yeah.
That's kind of a positive thing to keep everything in check. But if the system starts going wrong, can it be used in the opposite way, say in the form of a union? I'm thinking of education particularly. You said about that book that you found in that firm. Well, it's like the national curriculum, isn't it?
It is. It is.
Quite happily doing their job, and all of a sudden they get landed on their desk a 10-volume escapade.
All right.
But not actually telling us.
Well, I totally agree with you, and Mr.
So that comes through the red boxes, which use head teachers in each establishment.
Yeah, and it shouldn't, of course.
If the teaching staff who then revolves and almost push back up that green line.
Yes, that's right.
Because there isn't an effective audit system in schools.
It's absolutely true. I think that's nice analysis. Absolutely true. Absolutely.
Now you understand why you're frustrated.
Now, you see, people who don't... Sorry.
Why can't they go back to the square box? Why have you got something?
Well, that's a very interesting question, isn't it? You see, the square box route, this one, is an attenuator by definition, because the management haven't got time. This manager hasn't got time to go and count his electric motors. Let's go back to that example. The Central Work Study Department, given permission to walk into the works and count electric motors, can do so. And it has a project and it's got its technology in place to do that. That's just fine. Now, always you must get permission. Otherwise you really are subverting the authority system, and that won't do at all. But you can certainly pull this off if you're clever and considerate top management. And mostly they're not, of course, which is why we get in a terrible mess.
So if someone who's corrupt in the square box, right, who's doing something, and you're trying to find it, and they ask you if they can do an audit, which they'll realise will show these things, they're not going to give you permission, are they?
They can't not, you see. You're taking the case where one of the whole lines is corrupt, right? Now, you go down this line, and you say, you guys are all in charge of departments, and I want to do this particular form of audit. Are you going to stand up and say, you're not coming in my place? I mean, that's an instant signal that so you can't afford to do that.
So that means that they haven't really got a choice at all, have they? Because you're saying it's good because they've got a choice and they won't mind because they've got, like they've said you can do it. But you're saying that they haven't got a choice whether they can say it really.
Yeah, well, wait a minute. You have, you see, because it's a question of... I mean, dealing with real crookedness is quite hard to argue, but the thing in general is, Claire, that you are saying to people, do you agree that this is a good idea? If somebody says no, which is the choice, you expect them to have a proper answer. You don't say, no, because I am ripping the system off and you might catch me. So you've got to come up with a legitimate answer, and often there are legitimate answers. Take the work-study example. You can say to the higher-ups, hey, look here, we have a terribly sensitive shop to this kind of thing. We are in a very, very difficult union situation where people are paranoid. And if you come in here and count our electric motors, which you think is harmless, that's going to be read as management interference and we're going to have a strike. Now, that is an acceptable reason for not joining in, isn't it? Now, if people are actually crooks, then it becomes very interesting how you're handling the variety. Now, I was called in by the Royal Bank of Canada to look at their security system. I spent one day doing it and resigned the contract. I said, God knows, this thing is like, you've got to drive a coach and horses through this thing, and you all seem to think you've got a clever system. I won't be responsible for this, and I didn't. I wasn't. And none of you picked up, or at least none of you mentioned, in the paper this morning, 40 ways to rip off a bank's cash system. You didn't say it this morning. Oh, what an excuse. Yes, well, I mean, this is what's bound to happen. And I would think that financial skullduggery using electronics is probably at least 100 times what anybody thinks it is. Because they're so much cleverer than the management. You know, management's strutting around there in suits saying this, that and the other, and there are all sorts of hackers out there about 15 years old and into the system. Oh boy. Jane, I'm overcome, excuse me.
How do you go back to these motors? How do the people know to ask the question about looking at motors?
Well, somebody, probably, I'm often criticising accounts departments, but probably somebody's noticed the amount of capital that's tied up in the spares, you see. And they say, do we really need to tie up all this capital?
So it could be any good in the organisation?
Oh, yes. This is why I'm so interested in the Green Line. And I will give it a name later, but I've got ahead of myself and I can't give you the name. It's System 3 Star, and we haven't even got System 2 yet. So this line, I want you to recognize, because it balances the whole thing, is in many ways, the most interesting thing, because, you see, people are willing to talk about audits, that's a word they know. They're willing to talk about this work-study department, they know about that. They are absolutely incapable of discussing the residual balance of variety in a homeostat. It's because they don't know what the hell you're talking about. But that is what the green line's about. Now, I have written all these books. There are people in universities all over the world teaching that the green line is the orbit channel and reifying it. I gave you that word yesterday. Turning it into something solid. Raise the thing. When they shouldn't. They should be perceiving it in this. About purpose is that it is the purpose of the totality. And it pervades everything. So it's not a question of the green line having purpose. The organization has purpose. The attempt to give a mission statement is an attempt to say what that purpose is, and we've already seen why that doesn't work. What is really going to determine the purpose is the ethos that the top management manages to create in the place. Are we an ethical show? Do we care about the environment and so on? Now, all the big oil companies have whole departments now working on the green thing. Making films, proving they're not spoiling the environment and so on. And that's enough, isn't it? So long as you can con everybody into thinking that that's okay, you can go and spoil the environment till you're blue in the face. Now, where is the actual purpose here? The actual purpose is to rip off the planet. And what you're doing is putting dressage on that to make sure that you're not caught. Well, that isn't a green line. Oh, damn it, I would have to use green, wouldn't I? Sorry. That isn't this line. This line is a genuine contributor to adjusting the total variety equation between the vertical and the horizontal in order to reflect the purpose of the whole. How's that? Now, you apply that criterion to most of the things that we've mentioned here, and you'd be entitled to go and hang yourself. I mean, the EEC was mentioned. We've already destroyed the EEC in this conversation, if you think about it. Everything they're doing is precisely wrong by these criteria. Gotta be. They're using the red line when they should be using other lines. The sense of purpose is all over the place. You've got Britain opting out of the social chapter, which is lunatic. And yesterday's paper is saying we're going to suck them back in, which probably give them Major a purple fit. I mean, this is no way to run a fish and chip shop, never mind the whole of Europe. By the way, I meant to say yesterday, and I didn't, the number of variables in the black box of running a fish and chip shop is greater than generates variety, and I've tried to prove this, greater than the world's capacity of computers to deal with variety. Now there's a thought. You know, variety is one hell of a thing. It just proliferates all over the place. And our job in management is to contain it somehow or another, without being fascist bastards and without being silly, and allowing the individual in our organization to blossom as a person. We've no idea how to do this. The whole of Western society is now in glut with trainers who are trying to do this kind of thing, and enormous salaries, I note. And they're providing nostrums and putting people through courses. This is the only course I know of, folks. It is actually inviting you to think. That's my secret. But nobody likes it very much. You're a very nice crew. You're willing to have a go. But most of courses are sitting there being told that this is the latest way of doing things. And what the hell good is
Teaching
that?
us as well, right?
Well, yes, I'm afraid so, which is terrifying.
Can you just remind me again, I can remember what all the other lines in the diagram were. I've forgotten now what the blue line is.
The blue line is the resource bargain. So, if you count them, you've got 6 vertical lines to absorb variety, and this will sum up this discussion because we ought to stop. There's 6...
I'm missing one.
I haven't got to system 2. I do apologize. We haven't got time tonight. System 2 is the 6. Forgive me, just put that on the slate. I'll deal with that in the morning. Yes. These lines, which are 5 at the moment and will be 6, are ways of absorbing variety, and most people's perception of management is it's all on the red line. No wonder then that people are looking for jobs. Right? Can we close on that note? It's powerful.
So can I just ask you what
is she
It's not really a very important thing, but just so we know, is it always the blue line and the red line?
No, it's what I had to hand.
Oh, I just wondered if that's what they would call it.
No.
I ever talked to them about cybernetics and I did the blue line.
No, it's system...
Not that it's very likely, but just in case.
The green line is system 3 star. When we get it all into place, you'll get the words okay. I don't care what the colours are. It's the resource bargain, whereby somebody comes... Suppose you're a manager of system 1, and I represent the upper crust. I am saying to you, Jane, what do you need to make your department effective? And you say, well, I've got to have a new computer and I need 6 more staff and so on. And here's my budget. And I say, okay, if you get this budget, these permissions, you are going to deliver the following. Is that understood? And you say yes. And that's the resource bargain. And then all you need is the self-vetoing homeostat. We need enough coming back from you to head office, let's say, that to give assurance that the thing is working. And I do not want to see all your bloody accounts, because I haven't got time to read them. And what's more, if you were a crook, I wouldn't be able to spot it because you're too clever, and you would cover it up. So that's not the way to control anything. Oh, of course.
Nobody trusts them.
Well, that's too bad, and they should. But look, let's take the case where things are probably crooked, which does exist. What I'm saying is that what you have got to do is put monitors on the homeostatic loops that will pick up instability. We went through that earlier today. And then we'll say, why is Jane's loop unstable? And then we're likely to find out, even if she is clever. We are unlikely to find out if she's cooked the books, because she knows better how to conceal it.
So really there's 2 checks built into the system.
At least.
At least. Well, that we've learned about so far. And that's the green line and the monitors on the...
Every one of these loops is supposed to have every one of the homeostatic loops. Now, by the time we finish this diagram, there are going to be hundreds and hundreds of loops. And you can't examine them all, you see. You've got to have little signals, like President Sanguinetti's bus tickets. Just be clever about it, you know.